Something is shifting in the way a generation thinks about work, success, and what a life is supposed to look like. Not loudly, not with manifestos or movements. Quietly. In the choices being made every day by people in their 20s, the jobs they're leaving, the promotions they're turning down, the lives they're deliberately keeping small. Gen Z is rejecting ambition, and before you call it laziness, it's worth understanding exactly why. This generation grew up watching. They watched their parents work themselves into exhaustion, chasing a version of success that kept moving further away. They watched the housing market become a fantasy. They watched student debt turn into a life sentence. They watched people do everything right and still end up behind. And they drew a conclusion that the generations before them were too invested to draw. The game might not be worth playing. That conclusion did not come from nowhere. It came from data that their own lives provided. Gen Z entered adulthood during a pandemic that shut the world down, during an economic period that made entry-level jobs scarce and cost of living impossible, during a mental health crisis that their generation is experiencing at rates no previous generation has matched. They did not decide ambition was overrated from a place of comfort. They decided it from a place of exhaustion. There is a term that emerged from China that captured something real: tangping, lying flat. The idea that opting out of relentless striving is not failure, but a rational response to a system that extracts everything and returns very little. A similar energy spread across Gen Z in the West, sometimes called quiet quitting, sometimes called soft life, sometimes not called anything at all. Just a quiet decision to stop performing ambition for an audience that was never going to reward it fairly. It is worth being precise about what is actually being rejected here. It is not work. It is not effort. It is not even success in the traditional sense. What is being rejected is the specific mythology that was sold to previous generations. That your job should be your identity. That hustle is a virtue. That suffering through work you hate is the price of a life worth having. That loyalty to a company will be returned. Gen Z watched all of that mythology get tested and watched it fail. The loyalty myth was perhaps the most damaging. Prior generations were told that if you gave a company your best years, the company would take care of you. And for a narrow window of time, in certain industries, for certain kinds of workers, that was partially true. Then came the layoffs, the restructurings, the right-sizings, the elimination of pensions, the replacing of full-time roles with contract work. The company's side of that bargain dissolved. The expectation that employees honor their side did not. Gen Z saw this clearly because they arrived after it had already happened. They did not experience the betrayal, they inherited the aftermath. And so they made a different calculation from the start. Not because they are cynical, though they have earned the right to be, but because they are logical. You do not invest emotionally in an institution that has already demonstrated it will not invest back. That is not apathy, that is pattern recognition. There is also something happening at the level of identity that older generations are struggling to understand. For decades, the dominant cultural script was simple. You are what you do. Your job title, your salary, your career trajectory. These were not just things you had. They were who you were. Gen Z is rewriting that script. Work is something you do to fund a life. The life is the point. That inversion sounds obvious when you say it out loud. It is actually a radical departure. The rise of the creator economy, of remote work, of freelance and portfolio careers, gave this generation something previous ones didn't have. Visible proof that there were other ways. That you could build something on your own terms. That the traditional path was a path, not the path. Even for those who don't pursue alternative careers, that visibility changed the psychology. The sense that the corporate ladder was the only structure worth climbing faded. Quietly but permanently. Mental health is inseparable from this conversation. Gen Z is the most therapized generation in history, not because they are weaker, but because they are more honest. They are more likely to name burnout as burnout, more likely to identify anxiety as anxiety, more likely to say out loud that they are not okay and mean it. And what they are identifying, underneath all the clinical language, is often the same thing. A life organized entirely around productivity does not feel like a life worth living. There is a concept in psychology called the arrival fallacy, the discovery that achieving a long-pursued goal often brings not the fulfillment you expected, but a strange flatness. The thing you worked toward arrives and the feeling doesn't. Gen Z, raised with access to more psychological insight than any previous generation, has absorbed this idea early. They have watched people arrive at the destination and report back that it was not what was promised. They are recalculating before they spend decades on the journey. This does not mean they want nothing. That is the misreading that frustrates them most. They want things deeply. They want connection, creativity, autonomy, meaning, financial stability, experiences that feel worth having. What they are less willing to do is sacrifice everything else in pursuit of a title or a number. The ambition has not disappeared. It has been redirected toward lives that are actually livable. That reorientation is not a failure of drive. It is a refinement of it. The older generations who find this baffling or troubling often do so from a position of having made the opposite bet and needing it to have been correct, because if the hustle was worth it, then the sacrifice was worth it. And if this generation is right that the sacrifice wasn't necessary, then something uncomfortable follows. It is easier to call them lazy. It is harder to ask whether the people criticizing them might be the ones who were wrong about what mattered. There is a real cost to what is happening, and it deserves to be named. Some of what looks like a principled rejection of ambition is also avoidance. Some of it is fear dressed up as philosophy. Starting is hard. Building is slow. The vulnerability of wanting something and not getting it is real and painful. Not every person opting out of striving has thought it through. Some are protecting themselves from failure by never fully trying. That is worth being honest about too. But that truth does not cancel the other truth. The critique that Gen Z is directing at hustle culture is not wrong. The systems that promised prosperity in exchange for sacrifice have not delivered equally. The mental health crisis is real. The economic conditions are genuinely harder. The mythology was genuinely flawed. Both things are true at once. This generation is making a legitimate critique, and some of them are also hiding behind it. That complexity is the honest picture. What is emerging, slowly and without a clean name, is a different definition of a successful life. One that includes rest as necessary rather than weakness. One that treats boundaries with work as healthy rather than uncommitted. One that measures a good week not just by what was produced, but by whether the person living it felt like a full human being. That definition is not laziness. It is a rebalancing that the research on well-being, on longevity, on what actually produces life satisfaction largely supports. The generations that built their identities around work are now, in many cases, retiring into a void. The thing that organized their lives, that gave them purpose and structure and social connection, is gone. And they are finding that they did not build enough of the other things, that the trade was not as clean as it looked while they were making it. Gen Z is watching this too. It is not an abstraction. It is their parents. It is their grandparents. It is a warning they are taking seriously. None of this means that ambition is wrong. It means that ambition in service of a life you actually want is different from ambition as a performance for external validation. The person who works relentlessly because they are building something they genuinely believe in is not the same as the person grinding because they were told that grinding was the price of worth. The first is purposeful. The second is a story that was told to make extraction feel like virtue. What Gen Z is quietly insisting on is the right to ask a question that previous generations were discouraged from asking too loudly. Is this actually what I want? Not what I was told to want. Not what looks impressive. Not what justifies the cost of my education or satisfies my parents' definition of success. What do I actually want my days to feel like? That question is not the enemy of ambition. It is the beginning of ambition that means something. The rejection is not of effort. It is of effort without direction. It is of sacrifice without consent. It is of a life spent building toward a destination that someone else chose. What comes after this rejection, what this generation actually builds in place of the old script, is still being written, but the refusal to inherit a broken mythology without questioning it is not a failure of character. It is the beginning of something more honest. And that, whatever it becomes, is worth paying attention to.